As the choir finds their places, I encourage you, if you have your Bibles with you, and if you like to look up the passage in your Bible, to turn with me to Psalm 26. This is not going to have a lot of slides today. I think I've got maybe two, and one of them doesn't have anything on it. There it is right there. It is from Psalm 26, and as I read it, I thought how very underqualified I am with the words that the psalmist has written. Sarah asked me when she was here, my youngest daughter asked me when she was here the last time, have you told them about the resurrection, Daddy? And I said, no, daughter, I haven't told them about the resurrection. And somebody was standing around and they were giving me this funny look. There's a reason why she asked that question. And there's a reason why she was interested in whether you knew the story of the resurrection. And today I'm going to tell you the story of the resurrection. They want me to tell this story because it makes me look like a complete doofus. And so they want to know that you've seen me at my very worst. The story of the resurrection that they're referring to happened before either one of them were born. It was my third Easter in the ministry. I had a brand new wife and made a great big mistake, and I'm going to tell you all about it in just a few minutes. But it illustrates the fact that I am not the man that I wish I were. And after listening to the words of this psalmist, you will probably say with me, I wish I was more like this person. But I have problems in my life. Would you stand for the reading of God's Word as we read it together from Psalm 26. We're going to read the entire chapter, but it's not all that long. Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have led a blameless life. I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. Test me, O Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and my mind, for your love is ever before me, and I walk continually in your truth. I do not sit with deceitful men, nor do I consort with hypocrites. I abhor the assembly of evildoers and refuse to sit with the wicked. I wash my hands in innocence. I go about your altar, O Lord, proclaiming aloud your praise and telling of all your wonderful deeds. I love the house where you live, O Lord, the place where your glory dwells. Do not take away my soul along with sinners, my life with bloodthirsty men in whose hands are wicked schemes, whose right hands are full of bribes. But I lead a blameless life. Redeem me and be merciful to me. My feet stand on level ground. In the great assembly, I will praise the Lord. Whew. I don't know about you, but I don't measure up to that right there. The Word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. This passage haunts me, and I'll be showing you why during this message. I got married December 31st, 1981. I had had one Easter as a bachelor. My second Easter was going to be freshly married, and then I was going to be moving closer to seminary. It was my third Easter in the ministry, and the first Easter that I had not had a pastor as a part of the church that I was pastoring. I was on my own for the very first time, and we were in seminary. We were eating those ramen noodles and the baked beans and the popcorn popper, and just getting by the best way we could on a shoestring. And my wife came up to me a couple of weeks before Easter and said, "You need Easter clothes." And I said, "Well, I can make do." "No, you're getting a new suit." "Well, what about you?" "Well, I'm not going to be in front of everybody, but you are. We're going to Lexington, to the mall when we're in Lexington in a few days, and we're going to find you a suit." "Well, we don't have the money." "No, but I'll find something for you." And sure enough, we did. It was a double-breasted suit. And you might remember, because they come in and out, instead of rounding out at the bottom, they're square. And they cover. It just covers right there. And you can, you're more covered unless you were to do something like that, which I did a lot of. It was a brown double-breasted suit, and I mean, Tim, we went all out. I got the tie and the shirt. I mean, I felt like I was living high on the hog. Easter Sunday morning, we were supposed to have an outside sunrise service, but it was raining and it was cold and it was yucky, so we pulled in to the sanctuary there in Mansville United Methodist Church, about 11 miles away from Campbellsville and Campbellsville University. I brought the lectern down so I could get near the folks, and I began to tell the story of what happened on Easter Sunday. And as I'm telling the story of the resurrection, I didn't notice myself doing this, but every time I said the word resurrection, I would raise my hand in praise. And after I'd done that for a couple of times, I looked into the face of my wife, and she was appalled. And I'm thinking to myself, what did you think we were going to talk about? This is sunrise service. Of course I'm going to talk about the resurrection. And she was motioning, what's your problem? So I'll go on, and I'm telling the story of the resurrection. I look at her again, and she gives me this, and I can't change my message right here in the middle. What are you talking? What is your problem? Well, the thing was over, and she comes running to me. Dan, you kept saying the word resurrection. Yes, of course I did. And you kept raising your hands above your head. Yes, look down. And I looked down, and my fly was open. And my new shirt tail was sticking out of the fly. And nothing looked bad until I did that. And then everybody saw that silly looking side, and I was so embarrassed. And so every time I'm anywhere near around Campbellsville, if you're ever in Campbellsville and you tell somebody, Brother Dan Smith is my pastor, if they ask you, has he ever told you about the resurrection? Because he really showed us about the resurrection. And Sarah, when she comes back, you can say he told the story of the resurrection. Now, I don't usually tell that on Sunday morning because it's embarrassing. But it does fit in well with this message, because the psalmist who wrote this seemed to have it all together. And you and I, we don't. Now, if you're going to have a situation like I had, at least you're not going to be up front. Men in the choir, at least you've got women in front of you. I had nothing between me and these wonderful people. Our first Easter together, and I was so embarrassed. The psalmist starts out and says, "Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have led a blameless life. I have trusted in the Lord without wavering." I don't know what that does to you, but it beats me up. That's not me. I wish it was. But I have not lived a blameless life. And I'm going to ask, but you don't have to answer. Have you lived a blameless life? Now, I'm kind of honest about my high school years, and some of you think you must have been the lowest of the low. No, I had a good reputation in high school. They called me Dudley Do-Right, and they teased me about being a goody two-shoes. I'm honest about what I did in high school, and those that don't tell their stories did a whole lot worse stuff than I ever did. I wasn't malicious. I was just goofy. It would come into my head, I wonder if you could drive a Volkswagen Bug over the railroad trestle into Petroleum. And I happen to have a good friend that had a VW Bug. So next thing you know, we're stuck on the railroad tracks getting ready to go across the trestle into Petroleum, Kentucky. I treated women with respect most all the time. And I didn't use a lot of bad language because I'd kind of gotten it out of my system as a third and a fourth grader. But I was nothing like this psalmist. I have not always trusted in the Lord without wavering. What about you? I still waver a little bit from time to time. What about you? Verse 3 says, "For your love is ever before me, and I walk continually in your truth." I don't know if he's fibbing to God or if he's just got his act together. But I don't walk continually in the truth with God. I mean, when somebody comes up and says, "Do these jeans make my backside look fat?" I don't know what to say. The truth would be, no, it looked like that before you bought those jeans. But I can't say that. And sometimes you don't know what to say. Say nothing. That's right. You're a happily married man. Don't say anything. The truth will get you in trouble sometimes. They say there's two ways for a preacher to get into trouble. Lawrence, you need to know this. Two ways for preachers to get in trouble. The first way to get in trouble is to preach something that you know is not the truth. That'll get you in trouble. The second way for a preacher or pastor to get into trouble is to preach something that you know to be the truth. Because the gospel stings. And as I read this passage, this stings me a little bit. Your love is ever before me, and I walk continually in your truth. I do few spiritual things continually. How about you? As a matter of fact, this is confession time. I've already told you about the resurrection. I said, well, tell you everything else. I've had morning devotions on and off for the last 7 years, and right now I'm in the off period. I still have my alarm set. 6 o'clock is when I'm supposed to get up and have my morning devotions. And because it's not working so well, I've also got a 6:15 and a 7:30 alarm set so I can kind of get here on time unless the phone rings. At one point in time, I was reading through the Old Testament, not chronologically, but from beginning to end, and supplementing with a wonderful devotional book. And sometimes I would just do the Bible, and sometimes I would just do a devotional book, but I was feeding myself, and it was good. And right now, I have fallen off the proverbial wagon. What about you? My prayer life is still good, but my devotion life is not what it needs to be a pastor of this church or a follower of Christ. How about you? There's no dust on my Bible. How about yours? But I'm not reading it like I ought to. The parts of my life are not all together. What about you? Verse 4 says, I do not sit with deceitful men, nor do I consort with hypocrites. In other words, he's never been to our nation's capital. I do not sit with deceitful men, nor do I consort with hypocrites. Now, we know what the word hypocrite means. We know how we use it. To be a hypocrite means to have this standard, but to live by a lower standard. We know what that means. But there's another level that you need to understand the word hypocrite, because it's actually two Greek words together. Hypo means overly or overly. And crit comes from the same root where we get criticism. So you can be a hypocrite by being overly critical of others. Ouch! Do you not see hypocrites by that definition everywhere? And sometimes in the middle. To be in the mirror. To be deceitful means to intentionally misrepresent the truth, but we use hypocrite as one who does not live the life they espouse to other, but it also means someone who is overly critical of other people. Somewhere in there, I'm busted again. I'm guilty again. How about you? We see those people everywhere, don't we? Verse 5 says, I abhor the assembly of evildoers and refuse to sit with the wicked. I wash my hands in my innocence. Well, let's define some terms. Who gets to decide what is evil? What do you think? Who gets to define the word evil? If Joe Bevins was here, he would tell me right now. Who gets to define evil for the follower of Jesus? Okay, the answer would be Jesus. It's not my opinion of what's evil that I'm to live up to. It's his understanding of evil. Are you asleep? Or are you just afraid to say Jesus? Thank you so very much. I appreciate that, Pat. Who gets to decide who evil is? Our God does. And we're to live up to that. Who gets to decide who's wicked and who's not? Pat? Absolutely. God does. I cannot wash my hands in my innocence. What about you? These feet have taken me places that I wouldn't brag about. And I wasn't as bad as the people that I drove over there with. But still, they've been places they shouldn't have been. What about yours? And these hands, though they are forgiven, these hands have gotten me into trouble. And these eyes have gotten me into trouble. How about you? And these ears have gotten me into trouble. How about you? And my mouth has gotten me into a lot of trouble. How about you? The psalmist says, I wash my hands in innocence. Not me. Not me. Can you? Verses 6 through 8 says, I go about your altar, O Lord, proclaiming aloud your praises. I love the house where you live, O Lord. So how many times have you sat silent in worship when it was time to cry out praises to God? How many times have you chosen not to sing, though you might have? Chosen not to reach out and love someone, though they look like they needed something? How many times have you, like I, come into church hoping to get something out of church and forget all about worship is about us giving to Him, not us sitting like a sponge receiving more? I forget that. Worship is work that you and I are to do for Him. He's to be sitting up there listening. We're to be doing the work in worship. I forget that. How about you? Do we treat this place as God's abode? Or do we bounce basketballs off the wall and leave our wrappers underneath the chairs in Sunday school? Do we trash the church bus? Do we go into the Wesley Center and someone has to clean up after we've cleaned up because we do such a poor job? Do we recognize that this is one of those places where God draws near when we gather to worship? The psalmist goes about proclaiming aloud praise and loving the house of God's presence. How about you? Finishes with 11 and 12. It says, I live a blameless life. Redeem me and be merciful to me, for my feet stand on level ground. In other words, he's doing all right. This chapter feeds me up. The only way I could have listened to this read in high school was to be in the balcony not paying any attention. You pay any attention to this? This stings. You ready for me to flip this coin over on you? That's why I celebrate grace. This scripture is why I celebrate grace. I'm completely unworthy to be here. Completely unworthy to be preaching to you today. I have used my tongue for evil. I've used it in blasphemous curses. Not as bad as others, but bad enough. And God chose to use me anyway. I've been broken and God is putting me back together. I am an introvert who has the opportunity to preach out loud how wonderful God is. God has been very good to me. How about you? He knows what you are and loves you anyway. He watched you sin. He warned you not to. You turned your back on him and went your own way. And when you came to yourself and you came back to God and said, I have no right to be your son, but make me a servant. I'll serve you as a fallen child of God. He throws the robe over your shoulder and gives you the ring, and he feeds you and he loves you and he welcomes you back into this place. We're so very far from being anything like him. And he loves us anyway. Oh, mercy. Mercy, mercy. Sometimes I see little ones run around acting just like I was, and I get all bent out of shape. A good example, Butch and Sheldon, is our front yard. Driving me crazy. Come up here and there's tire burnouts in the asphalt. Don't they know this asphalt's in bad shape? Why don't they pick on the Baptists? They've got new asphalt down there. No, they come up here and they do the circles up here. And then they go into our grass. Don't they know these men on these lawnmowers are going to be bouncing around trying to mow the grass? They do it up here and they do it down there. And every time we show up at church, those darn kids are tearing our church up. And I get all high and mighty. And then the Lord reminds me, crud. The only reason I didn't burn out in the front yard of my church was because I couldn't figure out how to get a car up there. But I burned out in the parking lot too. And I came to church and threw my 32-ounce whatever in the yard. Ha, 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 take this, Jesus. Ha, ha. I got away with it. And I would come up here to chat and to talk. I don't think I ever came to a church and did what some of the couples do up here late at night. I did it somewhere else. And yet, he forgave my sin. How about you? Do you remember what you were and how you thought and how you behaved? Your stinking thinking and all of that stuff? You remember how long your boyfriend's hair was and how short your skirts were back in the 70s? The sexual revolution and all that stuff we got all caught up in. We were so carnal, we were so earthly, we were so fallen. But didn't slow him down a bit when we bent our knees and said, Lord, I want a do-over. He gave you a do-over. He did that for me. How about you? I am not the man that I wish I were, and yet my sins have been forgiven. How about you? Jesus came to take our place, to pay the debt of our sin, that I may become the man that I wish I were. We have hope because he loves us that much. And so for those of you who are visiting today, you've been to that high school reunion, you've been having a big weekend. You've been remembering who you were in high school. I hope that didn't sting too much. It stings when I look back on high school. For you who are broken, for you who are distracted.